Whether you're listening on your favorite podcast app or watching on YouTube, welcome to the Lions Roar podcast, brought to you by Lions Roar, a nonprofit media organization offering Buddhist wisdom and guidance for mindful living to benefit our lives and create a more caring and just world. For more, go to lionsroar.com, and if you enjoy this episode, subscribe so you don't miss future ones. In this episode, we explore the spiritual journey of James Ishmael Ford, a Zen priest and Unitarian Universalist minister who describes himself as having a Buddhist brain, a Christian heart, and a rationalist stomach. James shares what first drew him to Zen, how he balances it with his role as a minister, and whether these two traditions complement each other. We also dive into the power of Zen koans, the roles of doubt and uncertainty in spiritual growth, and his advice for those seeking a spiritual guide.
Hi, everyone. My name is Sandi Rankaduwa, and I am an assistant editor at Lions Roar magazine. Today on our podcast, we're fortunate to have James Ishmael Ford as our guest. James Ishmael Ford is a Zen priest and Unitarian Universalist minister who's pursued the spiritual path for over 58 years. He's lived in monasteries and spiritual communities, served as a parish minister, and preached in historic churches. James is also an accomplished author, having written books like Zen Master Who, If You're Lucky, Your Heart Will Break, and his most recent book, The Intimate Way of Zen. He's also served as a contributor to Lions Roar occasionally. We've been very lucky to have him. His work bridges Zen Buddhism and Western spirituality, making these teachings accessible to a broader audience. And we are so pleased to have him here with us today. So welcome, James.
Thank you so much. I appreciate this, Sandi.
Of course. So first off, you describe yourself as having a Buddhist brain, a Christian heart, and a rationalist stomach. So please tell me what that all means to you.
Sure. I stole the idea from Erasmus, who apparently was he was an Enlightenment philosopher, a Renaissance philosopher, and on the cusp, and theologian, Catholic priest. And one day, apparently, he was sitting outside the inn, scarfing away on a sausage on a Friday. And some colleagues came up to him and said, "What are you doing, Erasmus?" He said, "Alas, I have a Catholic heart, but a Lutheran stomach." Yeah, and that captured my dilemma in that. So for me, the Buddhist brain means that my core understanding of the universe, how I meet the world, is absolutely informed by the Mahayana tradition, and specifically the Four Seals, the Two Truths, and the Three Bodies. Those are axiomatic to my spiritual life. I just think they're right, and believe they're right, and feel they're right. I engage the world from that perspective. At the same time, I was raised a fundamentalist Christian. I literally learned to read the Bible from a large illustrated. I learned to read from a large illustrated King James Bible resting on my grandmother's lap. So the content of my dreams are definitely informed by Jesus and the Marys and Moses and that Miriam, that gang, and just kind of like who I am, I got kind of a rationalist disposition. I'm a high school dropout, and I went back to school late, and I was doing my undergraduate work at a little commuter college in Santa Rosa, outside of Santa Rosa, California, and there was a requirement to take a critical thinking class, and my friends all thought it was the funniest thing. They said, "James, you're the most critical person we know." On the other hand, before I learned that all I had to do was take the final examination and I was excused, I did learn two things. One was why in the world was something so rudimentary as learning how to read a newspaper part of an undergraduate curriculum at a university. And the second body shock before I left was, oh my goodness, they do need it. We're not a critically thinking people, and that just sort of just part of my DNA. So there I am. Yeah. In the course of it, I came on into this realization about who I am years ago. And over the years, I've noticed the emphasis floats, but they're always there. And there I am. Thank you, Erasmus.
And as I mentioned earlier, you're a Zen priest, a Soto Zen priest, I believe, and a guiding teacher for the Empty Moon Zen Sangha.
Yeah.
So I'm just wondering, how did you first encounter Zen specifically, and what drew you to that specific tradition? Yeah.
Sure. So I came of age in the 1960s in the San Francisco Bay Area. So, a lot of stuff was going on at that time. Among them was the first great explosion of access to genuine religious traditions outside of Christianity and Judaism, outside of the ethnic enclaves, immigrant populations and their children, and I was a child of the 60s. After I decided that psychedelics wouldn't save the world, I started a quest, and people kept mentioning a Japanese missionary who lived in San Francisco. He had originally been over to serve a Soto Zen temple, one of tiny handful of temples that had been founded in the early 20s for serving immigrants and now their descendants and such. It had grown quite a bit, and actually, when I was there, they were on the cusp of kicking the hippies out of the temple, and I began sitting. I looked at several other things and tried them on. They didn't really work. Zen worked.
And what was it about Zen that worked?
At first, maybe it appealed to the rational side. The Zen Buddhism that I understood was based upon the handful of books that were available at that moment. Probably foremost among them, Alan Watts' Way of Zen, and he does. Very reluctantly, I've come to realize over the years that he was a very important person to me. Despite the fact that he has some major problems, not the least of which is a not exactly accurate presentation of what Zen is. But he had enough of it. And I liked the stories. I liked the anecdotes. I was quite taken with the deeper arguments that seemed to be presented in this, this and the two or three other books that were easily available in the moment. And I think I was captured then by the practice. And this is where I depart from Alan Watts. Yeah. is that the assertion was, sit down, shut up, pay attention, and things will happen. And things happen. So that launched me on a long pilgrimage that continues to this day.
And you're also an ordained Unitarian Universalist minister.
Yeah.
So I was wondering how you combine that with Zen. Do they complement each other for you? And has one maybe deepened your understanding of the other, vice versa? Yeah. I'm just curious about that relationship.
Sure. Well, kind of the background to that was that, the Soto Zen that was taught in the San Francisco Zen Center, and its affiliate sanghas, was derived from Japan, which has its own unique history in the bigger narrative of Buddhism, and one was by a series of historical accidents. Its formation for really there's the professional practitioners and there's the laity. And the laity's relationship is always in Buddhism more emphasizing supporting the professionals. And what was interesting about Japan is that starting at the beginning of in the 9th century into the 10th century, they left largely the Vinaya monastic codes and embraced a variation on Bodhisattva vows, which come from a Brahmajala sutra. I promise I wouldn't get into the weeds too far. The ordination model changed, and it left the option for a non-celibate practice that created why they still use the Japanese, and you'll see often Soto Zen and Rinzai Zen. People call themselves monks or nuns. Mostly they're not. They, at least as we would understand in ordinary English, they're priests, but there's a monastic formation that occurs. That's the important thing. So I, not in the San Francisco Zen Center, but with an English teacher who was a Soto priest, I ordained with her, and I did that kind of monastic. I did that monastic formation, and actually had left, at some point, and I even thought I kind of walked away from Zen, and two things happened in my life. One was Unitarian Universalism, and one was finding a different style of Zen that was householder-oriented and driven by koan introspection practice. The Unitarian Universalists were critical for me. It's an American religion. It is the merger and the product of two old American religious denominations that started in the Christian tradition, the American Unitarian Association, which were people who it emerges really in the Boston area, and there's an analog in England as well. And they considered themselves Christians. They were actually descendants of the Puritans, but they were rational, and they did, like, in the early 19th century when critical analysis began, they took to it like ducks to water. And one of the first things they noticed was that the Trinity doesn't exist in the earliest manuscripts, and so their whole idea of what salvation was about shifted from the atonement through the divine sacrifice, Jesus as exemplar, and so it's a very naturalistic approach. It's how you live that matters. Very quickly after the rise of classical Unitarianism in the early 19th century, they moved even further through people like Ralph Waldo Emerson and others. Transcendentalism is a literary phenomenon to most people in North America, but actually it was a hotly contested theological move from the necessity of Scripture to nature is Scripture. And so you get people like Emerson, as I mentioned. Henry David Thoreau is more important to me because he really focused in on the thing as it is. And I'm reading this stuff and I say, my goodness. And then the Universalists are people who, they were people who just said God's too good to damn people. And there's a whole evolution, and it's a working class religion, whereas Unitarianism, as you might have picked up, was kind of heady and the upper classes of Boston, and they lived as parallel religions for a long time, and in the middle of the 20th century, they merged and they created what is essentially a post-Christian religion based more on rationalism than intuition, but they're both factors. And I found, but it has vestiges of the Christian tradition. They like Christmas and Easter, and there was never a conflict. I could be a Buddhist. In fact, I think the only conflict I ever had as a parish minister was when I was being interviewed for a job, as they wanted to make sure, they loved the idea that I meditated and I had these Zen connections and everything, but they wanted to make sure I wouldn't make them do it. So it gave me a structure, a place to live, a place. They're very social justice oriented. It allowed me a place for that part of my life, and really have the social thing down. Zen, especially at that point, didn't a lot. it's a meditation school. It's almost like going to a gym, and there's there was very little social component to it. And I landed in a Zen community that was very focused on the koan curriculum as developed in Rinzai Zen in Japan, modified by a Soto master at the beginning of the 20th century. And that remained my core spiritual practice. The Unitarian world, it was the place in which I could manifest it in the world. It was just really lucky. It came together for me, in a perfect moment. Almost makes you believe in a beneficent God.
Career journeyers, are you looking to explore what is next in your professional adventure? Minding the Gap Coaching, a leadership and career coaching practice, is here to guide you to new perspectives and approaches about your professional journey. They will take you from where you are to where you want to be.
You touched on a few things that I want to ask you about. So the first is, you mentioned how koans have been sort of pivotal for your spiritual journey. So can you just provide sort of a brief explanation of what that is and what led you to them and, really resonated with you?
Yeah. So there've always been kind of, not always, there are two big currents in the Zen tradition. One you might call shikantazo, using a Japanese word, that has to do with it's the bare practice of presence. You can see it if you look at it as we approach it, how it's rooted in the ancient Buddhist practices of shamatha and vipassana, but it's washed through China, and it becomes a very bare bones discipline in which we are invited to radical presence. I think Eihei Dogen puts it best in the Genjo Koan, in which he says that if you go out towards the 10,000 things, that's delusion. But if you allow the 10,000 things to come to you, there's awakening. And so this is a practice of intimacy, of presence. It invites a confidence that the world itself will teach you. Beautiful practice, powerful practice, transformative practice. Koan studies the other thing, and that kind of practice, that intimacy and presence, you can find analogs everywhere. I think all religions have some intimation that if you just be quiet for a bit, things happen. But it's hard to say. Shogun Hori, who's a Rinzai priest, scholar, actually at McGill for many years, he wrote a wonderful book called Zen Dust, which is mainly Zen Sand. It's a homage to an earlier book called Zen Dust, but it's mainly translations of technical aspects of koan practice that we don't need to go into here. But he wrote a 90-page intro to that, which is the best introduction to koan practice I've ever seen. I hardly recommend it. You can find PDFs on the interwebs. Victor Hori, Hori, Sogen Hori. But he posits that the origins of koan practice are in early medieval China, and basically Buddhist monks observing Taoists having a drinking game. And the drinking game consisted of somebody throwing out a line of poetry and then somebody else matching it to the general agreement of everybody that it actually fits or not. And then large amounts of alcohol are consumed around this contest. And the Buddhists kind of dropped the drinking and turned the matching into the project, which is the awakening of our hearts, seeing the world as it really is. And so they would take, for the throw-out line, fragments of fairy tales, exposition, bits of exposition from sutras and other Buddhist texts, mainly anecdotes of encounters between teachers and students on what was emerging as the Zen way. And then you're expected to meet it. So the way I would define a koan is that it's an assertion about reality wrapped up with an invitation. Aitken Roshi, Robert Aitken, once said, "It's a matter to be made clear." And in so it has a couple of different variations. There's something there are practices where you pay attention to this for a whole lifetime, to one case, maybe two or three, and you just endlessly explore it. And you meet occasionally with a spiritual director and unpack it. In Japan, they evolved a curricular system where you spend a lot of time on an initial koan in order to kind of crack open a little bit and begin to, you need that initial insight into our vast, openness, what we really are. And actually, some people do that for their whole lives. The assumption is you get sufficiently deep insight, then the bulk of koan introspection is further unpacking that, so you're not trapped in boundlessness or emptiness. And it's a lifetime practice. The formal curriculum can be done, in 4 or 5 years if you're in the right context, the monastery or something like that. For most of us, 20 years, and then it just informs the rest. In the traditional curriculum, you're given a last koan at the end, especially cut to your sense. So was that helpful? I hope.
Yeah, that's great. You also mentioned that you use the term householder instead of lay, and I'd like you to maybe elaborate on why you use that distinction.
Sure.
Yeah.
So, I'm certainly a minister. I've never renounced my ordinations, but, I'm married, I had a job. I live in that community, not in a cloister. And one of the kind of fascinating things about Buddhism come West writ large is how much it has become, and it doesn't matter where you're, whether you're a convert or if you're raised in the tradition, an emphasis has shifted. The clerical state is important. Vinaya monasticism and the versions that exist are important, but increasingly in the Western versions of the Great Project, lay people are involved in the practices and disciplines. Zen especially is a good one because, as an example, because it has a clear cluster of disciplines that can be practiced outside of the cloister. And I mean, there are definitely problems and difficulties, but there are problems and difficulties everywhere. And I'm just fascinated with, it's almost like a one more step, the Japanese, in China, still in Korea and Vietnam, where there are Zen schools, Vinaya monasticism is the normative form of the practice, and it happens within that community. And you get householders. I mean, even the literature of Zen from the beginning has householders. They're mainly, government officials, the odd emperor, and they're in the koan literature, and they're in the histories and things. From the beginning, householders have been Zen masters, awakened things. Here in the West, via Japan mainly, but then now we see versions from Korea and to a lesser degree. Well, and some of the actually very exciting Chinese teachers are, have householder heirs, so we're in this time where the neither monastic nor layperson, or maybe reminiscent of the third orders of the Christian tradition that arose in the late Middle Ages, where people maybe were aligned with monastics, but they were householders, but they followed a rule, and they cared. They threw their hearts into the matter. And we're seeing that here. And it's, as we speculate about what's going to come next, I think that's a big part of it's already what's here. And it can be a big part of what comes next, I think.
And another thing you touched on, and I believe you have a chapter in your book about it, is whether Buddhists should engage in sort of social justice issues.
Yeah.
And I was wondering if you can share your thoughts and advice on that.
Sure. So I think the project is awakening. The project is seeing who we are and putting the heart at ease, discovering the to use the technical term, the form is emptiness, emptiness is form, and how that unravels. And what we discover is that we're intimate. Two things, really, we are created out of each other. Our existence is absolutely contingent, and and as human beings, we discover filial obligations to the family, and in my experience, there's a need to manifest, and I think we have to be careful, because it's so easy to get swept into the every culture has its ideologies of justice and equity, and we need to be suspicious of any absolute claims of what is. But I can't imagine my life without having the consequence of my spiritual practice have something to do with other people, and particularly their suffering, not just the spiritual. I mean, just not as a mirror, but not as only the suffering of the heart, but the suffering of the body, and how those things meet, and now how we're the brokenness of the human condition, and the bodhisattva ideal is not leaving the world. And in fact, Zen really says, the inside joke is, you only know the empty and the specific, and the phenomenal, us, you and me. So I think some kind of engagement is critical to to especially a householder version of the practice.
My next question is, as a parish minister and a Zen teacher, I'm wondering what are the most significant challenges or lessons you might have received through guiding others on their spiritual journey, and also whether that's informed your own.
Yeah, it absolutely has. In my experience, there really are like two projects, and maybe once upon a time they were singular and part of the larger spiritual aspect of our culture, religious aspect of our culture. But today they really are, in most cases, two. And one is the project of waking up, which we've been talking about, and that's the seeing into the heart of the matter, discovering who we are, addressing the questions of, why, and why does it hurt? What is this all about? But there's also the other project, which I call growing up. Then we particularly see it in our householder practices, but it exists everywhere. And that is how, just how do we live? How do we meet each other? How do we act in this world? And a lot of that, I think most of the psychological projects are about growing up, not about waking up. Though you get some aspects of that in some of the differences, but disciplines. But what I discovered as a parish minister is that yeah, there's a certain amount of the waking up, there, but mostly it's about growing up. Why is my kid such a brat? Why do I keep falling in love with the same bad kind of person? These things, just what does it mean to be to be a human. They're informed ideally by each. They inform each other, but we need to attend to both. As a parish minister in practice, discovering that it really is most of it just how to be a decent human, and some of it is about the broken heart in its deepest places. For me, I quickly had to ran up against the fact that I hadn't maybe paid enough attention to the growing up part, and it threw me into that, both at me as a human, but also me being of use to people.
Finally, this is a very broad question, but what advice would you give to those interested in Buddhism who are looking for spiritual guides or teachers?
Yeah, that's important. I think a human interaction and a human spiritual director is really important. I don't think you need one at the front end so much. I mean, there's so much, what kind of Buddhism? I think reading a few books, going to different groups. Are you a meditator? Maybe you're not a meditator. Maybe, in the Mahayana versions of Buddhism, the other great school is the Pure Land. It's a path of trust and confidence, and calling on the great mystery to help, personified in several ways. It's really powerful. In the United States and Canada, there are there's a whole denomination of Buddhism called the Buddhist Churches of America, which is one of the Pure Land denominations in Japan. Really good stuff. There's maybe you're attracted to the monastic things, maybe it's Theravada, the way of the elders. There's considerably different emphases in how one approaches the matter in the Theravada and the Mahayana. Maybe you like a little magic, the Vajrayana is your game, maybe, so learn about it. We got the interwebs. There's pretty good stuff. Visit, find what it is that you're interested in. Meditation schools are the big thing in the West. That's what you're going to most easily come across. Maybe that's for you. Certainly was for me. The two biggest ways I think one can find communities of practice are the communities that are based in sharing insight meditation. They often bridge the Theravada and the Mahayana, and they have a heavy householder practice. They're all over the place. Just look for insight meditation. Zen is all over the place. Just look for Zen and try it. You might like it.
I think that's all really helpful advice. So thank you for sharing your wealth of knowledge on that and on so many other topics that we were able to touch on today. I've really enjoyed this chat, and I'm sure our listeners will as well. If you're hungry for more of James's insight and wisdom, I want to recommend you subscribe to his Substack, which is titled Unanswered Question, and his books, including, again, his most recent work, which is The Intimate Way of Zen. Thanks again, James. I really enjoyed this conversation, and I hope you have a lovely day.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening. Mission-driven, nonprofit, and community-supported, Lions Roar offers Buddhist teachings, news, and perspectives so that the understanding and practice of mindfulness, compassion, and wisdom flourish in today's world. Go to lionsroar.com and subscribe to receive unlimited access to online articles, meditation instructions, our new Buddhist glossary, and so much more.